Hi there, and welcome to my recording of my session at 3D Basecamp at Dimensions 2024. This recording is a complete recap of the session that I hosted on the Thursday morning, the last morning of the Basecamp sessions. And this is for anyone who was either not able to attend the session or already had a session booked at that time. The session that I hosted was called Breaking Boundaries, Revolutionizing Retail Design with Game Development, Grey Boxing, and SketchUp. That's a mouthful. I'm going to break it down into pieces for you so you understand what this session was about and why I'm so excited about using game development techniques in SketchUp for the retail industry. All right. As I did at the Basecamp session, a little bit about myself. I call myself a spatial architect, merely for the use of trying to choose a difficult word that has very little meaning to people, so that you can expand on all the different things that you do. So although I went to college and studied building engineering and architecture, I ended up working especially within the events, exhibition, booth design, and retail, and sometimes in the architectural sector of residential and commercial properties. But because so much of my architectural journey is outside of the traditional architectural direction, it felt easier at the time to call myself a spatial architect and concern myself for the built environment to its full extent. As you might hear by my accent, I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and I currently work and live in South Africa. Our studio is 3 people, myself, Mbogeni, and Juku. Juku and Mbogeni are what one would call, I suppose, apprentices. They're both children from an orphanage or from an orphan environment, and they both finished high school, but have no tertiary or college-related education. For me, why this is important is the way that I came to South Africa was through Lesotho, where I worked for a year as a volunteer in an orphanage. And so I'd like to offer people the opportunity to grow beyond the life of being raised in an orphanage. It's not always easy for people to transition from that space. And it's not always easy to have funds available within those organizations for people to go to any higher education. So for me, that's important. And the reason why I enjoy what I do so much is I can teach them and train them in ways that I was schooled. And hopefully with the specific software that I use, in this case, my love for SketchUp, I'm able to teach them things that I have learned that you wouldn't necessarily learn in college. So that's how our studio operates. And then I tend to be a very individualistic, specific person, and I like the things that I use. So we would always say we're using Google Workspace over Microsoft. We don't like working with Adobe products. We like working with Affinity products. We've got a real desire to engage with AI as sort of a backbone or an administrative heavily involved tool. We like to have our design process in Moleskine notebooks using Blackwing 602 pencils. Always like to use a Stanley measuring tape if we can, and back it up with digital assets like an iPad Pro, doing a LiDAR scan or scan to design with SketchUp, operate and engage with our designs in VR, use advanced 3D connection gizmos to navigate 3D space, etc. And we love drinking coffee over tea. So these are some of the intricacies to our design studio. And we like operating the way we operate and being very specific and the size of about tools we use. Go down a road of a few tool sets that you really enjoy using. So that's sort of the technicality of using them gets deferred to the background, and you can really focus on your conceptual design process. Like all great things in the world, business-wise, the only thing you have to do to become a really great entrepreneur or a really great business is to start in your garage, as this slide proves. So this is our garage. This is the way we started. And we've since transformed this space to be a little bit more appropriate and not feel like a garage. We've got some Herman Miller chairs. We like the open desk design solution, and that's how we see and seek out all our desks. We've got all the standard stuff: 3D printers, paper cutting machines, anything to automate some of the workflow. We've got a real love for books. As much as AI helps us to choose a design direction or punch out some AI renders, to really be able to sort of detox yourself from the digital experience, we like to be creative and use resources in book form as a way to stay inspired. As you can see during this photo shoot, my children ended up in the studio, and they tend to come visit us during the afternoons. Most of them are in primary school, and it's just one of the other facets of the way that we work, the life that we live, whereas I enjoy working from home. I enjoy the space that we have. I enjoy living a full life, and so having 5 kids is a daytime job in itself, and hence they tend to walk in every now and then. But it keeps the main thing the main thing. The job that we do, the work that we do, we love doing, and we love doing it for our families. Now back to the actual presentation. Enough about us and more about retail design. So I've broken the session down in 5 sections. I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the origin of grey boxing, talk through some of the key concepts of how it's used specifically in game development and game design. And then I'll show you the adaptation, the way that we use it in retail design. And then there was, at the Basecamp session, a hands-on demonstration where you as a participant could engage with. So we created a few scenarios where a client kept changing their mind on things. They were a horrible client in that sense. But it really showed you how the grey boxing technique can be so useful in the beginning and efficient and effective. And then we ended the session with some Q&A and a conclusion. So I will take you through those steps or through these topics, but then I will also take the time to relate to you a little bit of what happened in that session. All right, so on the origins of grey boxing, you might recognize what you see on the right-hand side of the screen of the slide, that this is the video game Super Mario, right? And so Nintendo used this graph paper as a really early on design tool in the 1970s to make up a video game. So before they started coding anything into the final game, they did their level design using graph paper and they drew out these blocks. So this is a wonderful way of designing. It's quite effective. It's helpful that you can do this over and over again. Just print yourself out another piece of graph paper and use some code keys or crayons to create this design element. And so using these simple 2D tile-based, square-based grids, you could create a really easy concept, a really easy way to design walls, hanging and suspended obstacles. And so as a prototyping tool, it might be rather primitive, but it is a really great way to get a really clear picture of what you're going to achieve in this environment without having to go too deep into the detail of the software. So game development, as you might imagine, or as you might have experienced, of course, grows beyond that technology of the early 2D designs and then transitions into 3D game environments. And one of the first techniques that we come across is called BSP, binary space partitioning. And in the early 90s, games like Quake and Doom, they use this BSP mapping. They create these level designs using very basic geometric shapes to show you what the user experience, what the level walkthrough is going to feel like and look like. And this is then all done before they started applying textures or detailing out the spaces. So this would be considered a very early form of gray boxing. You block out the level's basic geometry so that you understand how the space will function. Then in the early 2000s, we see that software like software studios, game studios like Epic Games and Valve, they developed their own level editors. And this is where gray boxing then really becomes an accessible tool. And so in early versions of Half-Life, you can see that all these blocks and shapes, all these components, as you would call it in SketchUp, all these primitive components, they help you to quickly assemble a level layout and then test it. And later on, we see that with the modern game engines that we have, we even heard about it at some of the keynote topics, that the integration of NVIDIA Omniverse, Unreal Engine, allows us to create a bridge between SketchUp and these game development engines. And so in that environment, we see that in the 2010s, the tools become far more powerful. Gray boxing still remains as a very early way to block out the environment and then test the game mechanics, test the interactability. In 2020 and beyond, we start to see that people within architecture and interior design also start to use the gray boxing technique. And this, of course, specifically in a time where a lot of people will have a YouTube channel with content created to explain techniques. A lot of all of that, what we see there, becomes so wildly accessible, so wildly perceivable, that it becomes much easier to understand different ways of designing. And so gray boxing finds its way into other industries. All right, so now for the key concepts that we see within a game studio on how they use this technique. They will focus on the layout first. And they'll use simple geometric shapes to represent the environment with the right scale, the right proportions, give you a sense of the flow of the space. They do rapid prototyping. Drawing only gray boxes is not a very time-heavy exercise. And so one level design might guide you through the space in a specific way, and one level design will guide you through a completely different way. And so all these different prototypes can stand side by side. Now, this allows for quick feedback and refinement, meaning that you might set up that environment and then show it to other departments in your game development team or game development company to create a feedback loop. So before investing a lot of time and resources into creating everything very detailed, you can use this to go through the concept in broad strokes. So when you then start to understand the space using the right skill, being able to navigate through the space in real time, to interact with the interaction points, things opening, closing, turning lights on and off, etc., then the space functions the way you expect it. And so then, especially in game environments, you would then do collision testing, making sure that you can actually walk through the space without walking into things or being blocked from entering and walking through the space. And whether that's done in VR or on a screen, that's all accessible. So now the adaptation of this in retail. And you've heard me use a few words that might have already made you think about how gray boxing can be used in retail. Like when we speak about level design, we might consider level design a different word for store design, and we see a parallel there. We might talk about walking through a level and having an objective in the game. Consider that the objective of purchasing something in an environment in a store. Or navigating your way through the level becomes navigating your way through the different store locations, or Maybe there are certain departments in a store, and how can you easily navigate from the one to the other? So for space planning in retail, you can use blocks, right? You can use gray boxing to produce blocks for fixtures, displays, point of sale counters, changing rooms, back of house areas, etc. And this then allows you to experiment with different layouts really quickly, as you see on the example on the right-hand side. And by using these simple spaces or simple shapes to create these spaces, you can iterate really quickly multiple versions of the store. Now, if you in your design journey with your client, if you very early on define gray boxing to your client, if you help them understand that the first design is not going to be a design that shows you the color of the fixtures and the floor type and the lighting solution, if you rather focus on the flow of the space and how the different departments and different product groups interact in the space, and if you explain to the client that that is the design process that you're going to take them through, then it also becomes really easy for them to understand what you are focusing on. And as you and I might, as designers, sometimes get distracted by the design process itself, like we would like to jump ahead. I can't ask you to put your hand up. We're not in a live session with each other. But if you were working on your own design, you would also sometimes become distracted and say, oh, I really want to figure out how this table works. Instead of drawing a gray box, I want to actually find the table that is specifically the table for my client. Let me go onto the 3D warehouse and download the correct table, right? You suddenly dive into the detail of this one object, but you haven't yet worked out how that object is going to fit in the space, and how many tables you might have in that space. So these are things to consider up front rather than later on. So instead of getting lost in the detail, let's focus on the overall layout first. So that testing and feedback with your client helps you then to meet your client's needs and expectations without committing to all the detail within the design. As much as you and I might get distracted by detail by downloading things from the 3D warehouse, your client might also get distracted by a certain texture on the floor when you are trying to discuss with the client in broad strokes how the space will operate and function, and what certain pros and cons are. Your client might get super distracted by the fact that you've modeled something wrong, right? It's happened to all of us. So especially in that early stage of the design process, keep everything in a way as simple or as abstract as possible so that you can tick off all the boxes of the layout before committing yourself to the detailed design. So this flexibility, just to reiterate it, it will save you significant time and cost implications. All right, so here's some images of a completely different space than a retail space. And this is just for me to show you how this technique can work not just in the retail industry, but everywhere. So with clear communication for all stakeholders, non-design people, you can visualize the space more clearly, right? This, what you see on the right-hand side, is a crisps manufacturing plant. There are multiple production lines side by side. And what we were asked to do by our client here was, can we investigate if it's possible to integrate multiple production lines? So instead of having 4 production lines, can we do 5? Or can we split one of the production lines into 2 different end products? And so after 3D scanning the space and modeling using these basic geometry shapes, the production lines themselves, we could see what were the safe areas in orange for fire hazards and escape routes. We could see in the dark green where people would navigate as the staff working on the production floor, how they navigated the space and how they walk between the machines. We could see in the teal blue the spacing required for all the machinery, and then we could see in the dark blue the main production line that wasn't going to move. And then in the opaque yellow above the space, we see the utilities required to power the machinery. And this is specifically electricity, gas, and pressurized air. And now what was going to happen was, if the client had to change some of the machinery around, then they would also have to perhaps create an additional utility line. And so they asked us to investigate, without creating an additional utility line, can we still keep spacing the production lines around, add the additional line without the cost of a new utility line overhead. And this was, in that sense, a really cost-effective exercise, because this factory operates in 2 shifts. So this factory almost doesn't turn off. So there's very little time to make these sort of alterations to the space. And it can be very cost heavy to stop the whole production plant, to start experimenting in real time with the existing manufacturing, with the existing production lines. So instead of physically moving all of this around, let's move it around digitally first. And gray boxing, very simple primitive models, are sufficient in showing all these variations. So again, a wonderful way to tackle some of these issues. All right, so that's enough about the history of gray boxing in the game development industry, the key concepts of what you can use out of this specifically for retail. So in the hands-on demonstration that we did at the Basecamp event, I asked everyone to participate by downloading a model, a test model from the 3D warehouse. So what I will do is I will introduce you to a case study, an existing space here in South Africa. I will then demonstrate to you how we use the basic model to set up the layout of this store. And then I will introduce you to the exercise file that I've created that you can download. And then I will give you the time to play around with this. Then I'll give you the time to play around with this concept store yourself. All right, so the space that we're going to look at is called L'Atelier Paris. It's a fine watch and jewelry store in Umhlanga Oceans Mall on the east coast of South Africa. It embodies the style of a Parisian apartment, evoking this 1920s French art de vivre, the love of life. And it's meticulously designed to give you this unique shopping experience where, as much as you are there to purchase a physical piece, you are buying into the experience of this life. And so the adventure of life and celebrating life's achievements is as much part of the experience as it is to purchase the physical watch or jewelry. Jean-Philippe and his team head up L'Atelier. And so you can see here a photo of them standing in front of the store and what their website would look like. So in this case study, what I want to demonstrate to you is how you can potentially look at designing the space. And then at the end of the presentation, I will demonstrate to you the actual final design, so that you also have an idea of what this turned out to be. All right, so while I'm showing the demonstration to you, I will ask you to download the exercise file from the 3D warehouse. And then once I'm done demonstrating the exercise itself, I will give you the time to walk through 3 iterations of the design process. And you can choose a hypothetical client instruction, a hypothetical client brief. And then we will walk through these designs together. So before I show you this slide, let me also open up SketchUp on my side and demonstrate it. Okay, so here's SketchUp. I'll go to the 3D warehouse and I'll type in the session name, the letter S for snake, dash 1744. And then you'll get as the result this exercise file. So it's session 1744, Basecamp 2024. And then you can download that directly into the model. And let's just place it in the center. make the default tray a little bit smaller. All right, so this is the environment. Let me give you a little bit more contrast by changing the style real quick. And let's do a speedy style, shaded with textures. There we go. And then I'll show you in the tags how we set up this environment and make that a little bit bigger. Okay. I can't see scenes. Have I turned my scenes off, or are my scenes not saved? No, my scenes were not saved in this file. That's all right. At the moment, what we can see is the gray boxing elements are these columns and these cylinders. Let's explode this for a moment. And what you can do is we can turn the guides off and we can turn the grid off. If you want to use the grid is set up to 1 meter by 1 meter, so roughly 3 by 3 foot. And hopefully that will help you to navigate the space quickly without having to measure things out. The mall environment, the steel that we see, the walls, again the grid lines, the gray boxing elements, the floor, the environment and the columns, all of these live on their own layers. So that can be quite helpful. For now, I'm going to turn the guides and the grid off. No, I will keep the grid on. And then our dear figure, we will just space him outside the store. And I get the feeling that when I inserted this, I didn't go directly down to the bottom, to the base point. So I'm just gonna snap to the grid here and then snap to the 0 point of my SketchUp model. And so if we had to select any of these colors and any of these shapes for any particular areas in the store, I would say, for example, this dark gray, this black, can represent a storeroom or a staff room. And we're just going to use the scale tool to scale this following the grid line as a way to space this. And I might as well make it the full height of the store, so you get an idea of what the storeroom and staff room could look like. And maybe what I should do is I should make the storeroom sort of half the depth, and then using the white, I can then make a copy of this object, and I can actually just sample this white so that we're using the same colors. Oh, excuse me. I can sample this white to get that different color going. Okay. And then this would be the staff room, and the gray box would be the storeroom. Then for one of the displays, let's say we're doing a makeup display or a fine jewelry display, we're going to use this pink one, and I'll make a copy of it so I don't lose the box, which I didn't do for the gray. So let me copy that over. And then I'm going to make this display 4 meters across and 1 meter deep. And I'll place 2 side by side. And maybe I should just make a copy by rotating one. And place that sort of center along the back wall. Just follow the grid lines as a guide. And then that I'll place there. Maybe there should actually also be a round table in the center, which won't be that high, but actually will be a slightly bigger table. And that will sit there. Okay, so now I can walk in through the store, through this door and that door. And then my second product range might be the teal. And instead of creating new boxes and wall displays, I'm just going to make a copy here. Rotate maybe at 45 degrees. Position that against the wall. I'm not going to be too precise. I know that the wall is slanted a lot more, but this is the early on impression. And now I feel like that this front space is a bit too empty. So I'm going to start with yellow. and not create something very big, but maybe something 2 meters, the same height as the table at present. And then these will be the display boxes, I suppose, in front of the store. So we'll do one there. Oh, it started floating a bit. Do one there, and we'll do one here. There. Okay. So these are alongside the glass as I'm walking past the store. These will hopefully attract my attention. And now I get the feeling that this is still too empty and that's still too empty. So I'll copy one over and position one here. And I'll copy this one as well. It sort of sits under the same angle. And then I'll color them in the other two colors so that they direct your eye towards those displays. They all feel like part of the experience. I don't know exactly what happened here with the teal in the background, but they're not touching the floor. So let me scale that back so that everything still sits flat in that space. Yes. And then it'd probably be wise to also have a checkout counter. So let me use this red color here and make that maybe 3 meters across, and then also not so high or tall. And then this would be a very, very quick 3D model of a store environment. And you can see how you can navigate a space, how you sort of end up in these cul-de-sacs, these circular end sections of the store that you can just keep walking around and navigating yourself through the space without ending in a sort of dead corner. And this could be a very early version of 3D modeling a store with certain requirements. Now let's go back to the presentation. And what you can see here is we're going to work through 3 iterations. In the session in Vegas, I gave every participant about 15 minutes to walk through one of the iterations, and then we kept changing it. So what I want to ask you to do is maximize the space for retail display by client 1, add a small storage space, and create multiple exclusive product zones. So if you choose to work for client 1, what I ask you to do is then from now on follow the instructions for client 1 as we go through the different iterations. If you would prefer to work for client 2, then balance your retail space with a storeroom. So equal space for retail, equal space for storeroom. Minimalism here is key, so don't display too many products. Client 3 wants to focus on wall displays with seating in the center. Minimize the angles, make everything straight. Okay. Once you've started working through this, and you can pause the video at any time, of course, work through this for about 10 to 15 minutes maximum. Like really, really try not to overthink it. Really try to use as many of the geometric shapes as possible to create the right layout that you so desire to create. And then after 10 minutes, just stop in your tracks and then go to the next slide. So you can pause the video, work on this, and then go to the next slide. The reason I'm asking you to pause is not to look ahead and basically cheat your way into iteration 2 and 3, because I'm trying to help you design, I'm trying to help you iterate really quickly, and each time make very significant transitions between each iteration and really change the case study dramatically. Some of the participants said to me when I showed them iteration 3, are these real clients? And so hopefully these are not real clients because the changes are a bit too dramatic. But it can help you navigate some maybe some difficult client conversations. All right, so iteration 2. Create an additional room for client 1 in the same size to the storeroom, but for a staff restroom. So whatever size storeroom you created, create an equally sized staff room. This might cause some conflict with your product displays, so perhaps you have to remove some. For client number 2, you can reduce the storeroom. So reduce it by whatever size or percentage you envision, and then utilize that space for more product display. For client number 3, please create an exclusive product zone, which can include angled walls. So that's the deviation there. All right, if you've given yourself 10 to 15 minutes on this iteration, then you can move to iteration number 3. And for iteration number 3, I'll show you 2 slides. First slide, here are the changes for client 1, client 2, and client 3. And then what I've done, just to edify this, if this sounds a little bit too confusing, I've shown you these small diagrams as well. So I'll just go back and forth between the slide that comes next. So here you can see the changes. Client 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So client 1, you reduce the retail space to the left-hand side only. Storage and back of house remains on the right-hand side. Okay. So in red is storage and back of house, and on the left is retail space in green. So client number 2 does something similar, but you're only allowed to use storage and back of house in the top right section of the store. And then the left-hand side of the store is still fully for retail. And then in iteration number 3, you see we're not using the door on the left-hand side, we're only using the door at the bottom right. And then you need to mirror the whole store. So whatever was on the left, it has to be on the right, and whatever is on the right is now on the left. And that's just so that you can play around a bit with the angles of the wall and see how you can revitalize the space now that it is swapped. Okay, I hope you've had fun. I hope you've been stretched a little bit. I hope you didn't go beyond your breaking point with these mad clients that have wanted everything changed every single iteration. And I hope you've learned some things. If the technique seems useful to you, I don't know if within the Basecamp review you can leave comments on each session, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever you prefer, and then that way we can connect around this topic as I want to develop this content further. So the key takeaways for today is focus on your layout. Do not get distracted by the details. Use simple geometric shapes so that it's easy to create quick iterations, and do early feedback sessions so you don't have any wasted resources between yourself, the client, and any other stakeholders. Test as many ideas as you can, and then that way you'll create the best solution for your client. The attendees shared their experiences, and I will share them with you as the video comes to an end. But if you want to do a survey of what I showed you digitally today, please scan this QR code. If this is no longer live, again, feedback can be provided perhaps in the comments, or it can be provided to me personally on LinkedIn, etc. If you want to connect with me, you can scan the LinkedIn code or the Instagram code. And if you want to learn a little bit more about these design techniques, or where I drew my inspiration from and where I came across this technique, then you can use one of these 3 links below to learn more about level design, spatial communication, and introduction to level design itself. Here are all the 3 codes together. So that's it. I hope you really enjoyed this session. I recorded a second session that was unfortunately not available at Basecamp, which is a bit longer, and it focuses on digital twins for retail. We're looking at a multitude of stores and see how we can use components, dynamic components, to really quickly set up a space, and then go through the process of not just modeling stores and creating digital twins, but actively engaging with different campaigns for clients and their changes between summer and winter, and then working all the way from the early concept to production files and artwork files for print, so that all of this can be created. So that's this for this session. If you want to find the other session, I'm sure you can look for my speaker handle on the 3D Basecamp resources page. If you find this content interesting, please reach out to me on LinkedIn to create any other more educational material for retail. I know it's sometimes hard to come by in either the SketchUp community or online in general, and I'd be happy to create more content. If you have any ideas or want to connect with me for any projects, again, connect with me on LinkedIn. And with that, thank you for watching this session, and I hope to see you at Basecamp 2026.